All right, let's kick off this thing. Hello, Gino, Jeff, Tom, Jeff, and DSBN. It's a nice small group today, so I think we can probably make this interactive. Be great if you unmute yourself anytime and jump in, or instant message into the Skype window, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions that come up along the way. This is going to be kind of I don't want anyone to panic, but this entire webinar will have no PowerPoint. Now, I know, if any of you drop off the call because you were expecting an hour of PowerPoint, we're okay with that. Our egos are strong, but we're going to try this experiment. Actually, this is the way that Chris always does it, with no PowerPoint at all. So that this entire session is all about operations management, the operations management and security suite, the OMS suite, and very specifically the log analytics portion, as well as the Azure automation portion. This is Matt Burke. I'm the Director of Sales here at Soft Landing, and most of the time you're going to be spending over the next hour with Chris Stelzer, who's one of our Senior Infrastructure Consultants and specializes in these two technologies of Azure Automation and Log Analytics. And obviously there's enough here to pique your interest that you're willing to spend an hour on this subject, something that I'm incredibly excited about as a 20-year veteran in the technology industry, as it's making addressing certain IT problems possible or easy in a way that's always been very difficult. If you work for an organization that's large enough to have a dedicated operations management person who can sit there and look through logs as they come in, or look at log trending, that's wonderful. But most organizations that are small enough that that's a portion of one person's job, we aren't good enough at it, and we sacrifice the opportunity to get more proactive about health, more proactive about performance monitoring and management and those kinds of things. Microsoft's really making a big move into this space with this log analytics. As you'll see here today, it's a pretty well matured, featured way to get a strong handle on operations management, generating and all the data being generated by these log files. And I think without further ado, I should hand the baton off to you, Mr. Chris Stelzer, for the rest of our webinar here.
No problem. So we're here to talk about log analytics, and log analytics is a component of the Microsoft Operations Management Suite. Now, this is a suite that Microsoft provided to sort of augment the functionality that a lot of System Center provides, both from operations manager perspective and even in some aspects from a configuration management perspective. So what we'll talk about today is not the Azure Backup or Azure Site Recovery components. Within the OMS suite, we're going to talk about the log analytics component. And this is a component that anybody can fire up. The only prerequisites are an Azure tenancy. So if you want to sign up for an Azure tenancy, if you're not in the Azure ballgame right now, you can go ahead and do that very, very easily. Once you sign up for an Azure tenancy, you can actually light up the log analytics component under the More Services section within Azure. Now, this section will allow you to create what's called an OMS workspace. And you can create as many OMS workspaces as you want. So it can be handy for, analyzing different areas of your business and isolating particular agents within the OMS stack into, certain workspaces to help filter that information. Maybe you want a workspace specifically for your SQL servers, maybe a workspace specifically for your domain controllers. It's up to you. So once you light up this particular workspace, you'll get a nice URL to connect to this workspace and begin configuring it. Now, there's different pricing models available. There is a free pricing model, and this is why I always pitch log analytics, because it's 100% free if you want to stick with the free pricing model. Free pricing model is limited to 500 megs a day of upload. What that means is, as we describe how the agents work, those agents begin uploading data to your OMS workspace for analysis using all kinds of different tools. Now, the free plan will limit you to 500 megs a day. Now, to give you some aspect of what that would entail, generally about 15 to 20 servers is approaching that threshold of 500 megs a day upload. After you exceed 500 megs a day, they just stop processing your data. So you'll see your graphs and intelligence kind of just drop off. The free plan is also only limited to 7 days worth of retention. So you can only analyze 7 days worth of data using the free plan. But it's more than enough for anybody just to get started. You can go to a per node pricing plan. which basically gives you unlimited upload, or you can go to a per gig standalone model, which just charges you per gig. So, in a month, if you end up uploading, 20 gigs of data, you're only going to look at paying, I think it's about $2.30 per gig. So you're going to be looking paying, 60 to $100 per month. So encourage everybody to start off with a free plan and take a look. So once you light up this function called Log Analytics, you'll actually have a link to your Log Analytics dashboard right here through the OMS portal. And what this does is it basically takes you to your OMS portal. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is start connecting agents to your environment so you can begin analyzing that data. And we can do this under the connected sources. Now, if you're already using something like Operations Manager through the System Center stack, you can actually have SCOM act as a proxy for this. So you don't need to download and deploy agents. You can just load up your SCOM environment. You can key in your credentials under the Insight and Analytics section under the SCOM administrative node, and it will actually take all of your SCOM agent data and send it to your OMS workspace without you having to redeploy the agent. If you're not using Operations Manager, you can download the agent here. And this agent that we're downloading is the exact same agent as Operations Manager. It's called the Microsoft Monitoring Agent. It is the same agent as SCOM. This agent can connect directly to SCOM, or it can connect directly to an OMS workspace. So it's nice, functional, unified agent. If you're going to use Operations Manager, you can use that same agent. If you're going to use Log Analytics, same agent as well. So Microsoft really made it simple. So you can download and deploy this agent, and what you'll want to do is when you deploy the agent, it's going to ask for your workspace ID and primary key. Those are the keys that basically tell the agent what workspace to start sending data to. Now, the beauty of these agents are they support both Windows and Linux, and there's no constraint as to where the agent's deployed. Doesn't matter if it's on a different domain, doesn't matter if it's on a workgroup machine, doesn't matter if it's in an untrusted forest. You deploy this agent wherever you want. There's no constraints with security or any sort of integration with your current on-premise or Azure-based Active Directory. So that makes things really easy. What else can you do for connecting data sources? All kinds of things like Office 365. You can key in your Office 365 credentials to start pulling back information with regards to Office 365. Things like file activity, administrative role changes, all kinds of stuff. As well as Windows telemetry. If you're looking at upgrading to Windows 10, there's a great solution in here we can talk about called Upgrade Analytics. And what this allows you to do is take this commercial ID, and using this PowerShell script, you can actually deploy this to your workstations. This doesn't deploy an agent. All this does on your Windows 7 and up workstations, it tags your commercial ID for your OMS workspace with the telemetry data that is currently being sent to Microsoft. Windows 7 collects all kinds of anonymous usage data, unbeknownst to most people. It's just a function of how the Office and Windows stack works. So by adding this key and deploying it through a PowerShell script, when that data gets sent to Microsoft, we can actually analyze it for Windows 10 compatibility. So there's a whole solution around analyzing all of your applications, your drivers, your hardware, and identifying whether or not those systems are compatible with Windows 10. We can also collect additional types of data. Additional types of data being things like custom event logs. So maybe you've got custom applications like SharePoint or other particular event logs that you want to capture. By default, the more solutions you add, which we'll get into, will begin collecting more event logs. But maybe you have application-specific event logs you want to start collecting, as well as performance counters. So this is really cool. We all know about the tool called perfmon. I can fire up perfmon, look at my performance monitor, and we can see what kind of counters are available to collect. All kinds of cool counters like the average processor time, free memory usage, all kinds of different counters we can begin collecting. Other cool counters are like process counters. So maybe you wanted to track the individual read and write IOPS of a particular process. And I can share a real-world example of where this was used. We wanted to track what the IOPS of some of the Oracle SAP processes were in Azure so we could properly scope the infrastructure and disks. So we can actually go in here and add these particular performance counters to Log Analytics, and it begins collecting that information in near real time. And you can actually see this in here. All you have to do is key in the disk counter name, it provides a list of all the different counters that are available, and you can specify how often you want to collect those counter values. Now, obviously, this is going to add to your data collection. I think Microsoft iterated that I think it's about 1 meg per instance per counter value. So if you add something like the average memory available, this is going to be 1 meg per day per server of data that you're going to be collecting at a set interval. And you can actually reduce this to a 10-second interval. And we'll show you what happens when we can begin looking at and analyzing this kind of data. We also support other things like Linux perf counters, IIS logs, custom fields, syslog servers. So basically, you can see the gist is it's a collection tool. We begin passing it data sources, and then we get into the fun part of actually analyzing this information. And the way we analyze a lot of this information is simply through the solutions gallery. The solutions gallery is provided by Microsoft to allow vendors and Microsoft the capability to start analyzing that information that you have in your environment. One of the best things that I think is in here that I encourage everybody to start with if they haven't done it is the AD assessment tool. So what this tool does, when I add this solution to my environment, it begins collecting information pertaining to Active Directory health. So what this begins doing is actually processing all of the different components that make up Active Directory in terms of replication, partitions, OU structure, best practices against security, all kinds of things. And it begins analyzing that information and producing you a list of recommendations. Now, the cool thing is about how easy this is to stand up. In the past, if you wanted to do a wrap for your Active Directory, it's a very complex and arduous process. You have to, run collection tools in your domain. You got to hit multiple DCs, and then you got to understand and analyze the results of the wrap. Well, we just did this recently for a particular client that wanted to do an Active Directory assessment. So we said, hey, let's leverage the tools that are available in Log Analytics to do that. So we just hopped on the environment. We created a package for the Microsoft Monitoring Agent with the Workspace ID, pushed it out using SCCM to their 17 domain controllers that they have in the environment, and then added the AD assessment solution. So very quickly, not only do we have an AD assessment solution, we actually have an AD replication status solution as well. So we can see all 17 of their domain controllers were assessed, and it basically performed numerous checks, 15 checks on security and compliance, 72 past checks on availability and business continuity, and we basically get all of the recommendations weighted in here, ensuring that, and everything's nice and drill down and understandable and readable. So things like ensuring that the operating system updates are patched. This particular client has some DCs that haven't been patched in a certain number of times. And it actually takes the priority of listing all of the affected objects in the environment and when the last time those particular things were patched, as well as things like changing your minimum password policy or changing your password policy to enforce minimum password complexity rules. And it actually weights these and gives you really nice, easily understood actions in terms of what you can do to remediate these issues. So we begin seeing that Microsoft has the better knowledge than anybody with regards to Active Directory health. And all they've done is bundled in all of the best practice tools that they have available for analyzing this data. So the AD assessment is a really, really good solution that I encourage everybody to use. Now, delegating permission to these workspaces can also be done with live IDs. You can use your synchronized Active Directory authentication for a single sign-on type experience, or you can use live IDs. So it's very helpful if you need to give an external party access to your dashboard or information. So we can flip back to our internal dashboard here and look at some of the other solutions that are available. The security and audit is another really, really good solution that I encourage everybody to look at. This will analyze things like logins, authentications, bad password attempts, locked out accounts, you name it. Now, by default, the security and audit solution begins collecting all of the security logs on all of your servers. So that is a substantial amount of information, and you will find you will quickly exceed the 500 meg per day upload limit with the security solution. So what you'll notice when you go under security and audit, there's actually a settings button up here. And what this allows you to do is customize how much data you would like to collect for the security and audit solution. So by default, it's going to collect all events. And this collects all Windows security and app locker event logs. A lot of data. You're talking maybe 100 megs per server per day. So what you can easily do is drop this down to a minimal. You'll get a nice balance of security events that enable you to have some detailed reporting, but not too much to sort of exceed your data threshold and limit. So once we go back under the security and audit solution, we can see what's available in there. So we can see things like, network and security IPs, different notable issues, computers missing updates, computers, logons with clear text passwords, potentially authentications happening using, SQL authentication, or, maybe FTP using some clear text passwords. And you can actually drill down to any of that information. So I like this identity and access one, failed logon attempts. Common issue in most organizations. Maybe you have edge servers where people have the ability to authenticate to them. In this case, we have a few edge servers in here, and you can actually get a listing of all of the failed logon attempts. And we can actually very easily see all of the different user accounts that are being attempted to log into this particular machine. Most of them being the most common ones, obviously administrator, admin, and if you actually drill down into these bad password attempts, you can actually see the exact event log entries that are leading up to those particular events. So you actually see the exact server that this is happening on, the account that failed to log on, and actually the details of the actual security event for detailed analysis. So all these solutions are really doing is reading event logs, reading syslogs, reading data, reading performance counters, and providing that information in a much easily understood way. So you can really get down to the most impactful information to really make a difference to how you run your business. Another solution that I find is absolutely fantastic, it's currently in preview, and it does require one additional agent. This is the service mapping solution. And what this solution does is allows you to map the different components of a particular server. So you might have a server, say it's a middle tier, say it's a web application with a back-end SQL and some front-end web servers. You want to really understand how that application works. But how do you do that? How do you understand what ports, what servers that particular app is communicating to? If there's an issue communicating with a particular server in question, how do we know that? Well, this service mapping solution enables you to do that. And what it does is it gives you an additional agent to deploy called the Microsoft Dependency Monitor Agent. And what this begins to do is monitor that server and all of its dependencies, all of its incoming connections, all of its outgoing connections, and everything that makes that server itself and what that server is talking to. So as an example, we threw this on our configuration manager box in our environment because SCCM has lots of incoming connections, lots of outgoing connections, and we can get a gist of what that service mapping would look like. So this is really, really good for beginning to understand, you might have these black box applications in your environment and you want to understand what they're talking to, and if something goes wrong with that application, how do you begin to troubleshoot that particular application? So in this case, here's our service map. We can see our server with all of our different services and all of the incoming and outgoing connections to each of those servers. So we have an organization of about, 50 people, so I expect probably, 30 to 50 clients to be talking to our SCCM box. And with this, we can actually identify all of the clients and the exact service that they're talking to. And you can actually drill down into this information. You can actually see the IP and the port. These are SCCM client status ports. So I can see that, all this client status and communication is happening. I can see incoming connections to SQL servers from certain IP addresses. I can see outgoing connections to things like our domain controllers for doing Active Directory user and group synchronization. I know that occurs, frequently with Configuration Manager. And everything in Log Analytics is time-based. So for root cause analysis, this tool is really, really handy to be able to, on the left-hand pane, say, rather than the last 10 minutes, let's look at what's happened on that box in the last hour. So very quickly, we can just click what's happened on that box in the last hour, and we'll begin seeing every incoming and outgoing connection happening on this particular machine. And what we quickly see is some failed attempts here. So we see some outgoing connections from the SMS Executive Service to this particular client. Now, I'm not sure what this port is. It's probably something like client push or client communication, and this particular server is just offline. It's attempted to reach out and grab a status of this client, and we can tell that this particular instance has failed simply because we see a red line from this outgoing connection. And when we initially installed this service mapping on this particular box, we fixed the problem immediately. I actually saw outgoing connections hitting my domain controllers, and these are two valid domain controllers. But what I did see in here previously is a red line to an IP address, basically a non-existent domain controller, which was really, really strange. So after some quick investigation, we realized that someone had installed a virtual network adapter with a second IP on a domain controller that was basically registering two DNS entries for this domain controller, one of them being a non-routable address. So very, very quickly we hopped on that DC, we removed that bunk network adapter and DNS entry, and we fixed that problem. So for root cause analysis, this tool is really fantastic, especially at gaining some insight that you might not have into your applications. What's going on with the apps? What are they talking to? And you'll notice that Microsoft has really designed this service mapping as sort of a single pane of glass for all the other solutions. So what we can do is look at all of the alerts on this particular box. So maybe we set up and configured alerts for thresholds like low disk space or high CPU. All of that's integrated into this service mapping. Performance. Here I can track the CPU utilization, memory, network throughput, as well as all the processes that are sending and receiving information. So for root cause analysis, again, it's second to none. We can actually do change tracking as well, which is a module that I'll talk about in a few, that allows you to track whether or not software's been installed, whether or not services have been changed, i.e. a service was running and now it's stopped, or maybe a file's been changed. Maybe you've got some, you want to keep track of the host file entries or, web.config files on your servers to make sure that, those files don't change. There's a change tracking solution to do that, as well as security and compliance issues, as well as update and patching issues. So everything is really built into this one graph. So when you're troubleshooting applications, the solution really, really is second to none. And this information actually came from Microsoft's Blue Stripe acquisition from a few years ago. So they finally got around to connecting that information into Log Analytics and showing you that information from a nice visual standpoint. So service mapping is one of my favorite ones, and I definitely think we're going to see a lot more of it. So what else can we do in terms of, maybe custom data sourcing and information? Well, we begin collecting those performance counters. What can we do with that perf counter data that we began collecting? Well, what we can do is, you can always do manual log searches. Once you understand how the search criteria in Log Analytics works, you can begin to surface some really, really cool information. Because, Log Analytics is only as good as the solutions that are provided from Microsoft and vendors to analyze your data. If there's no solution out there to analyze your event logs or, particular types of data that you need to do, you're going to have to resort to, developing your own intelligence around, how to analyze that information. And what we're quickly seeing is Microsoft launching the solutions gallery to the Azure Marketplace. So they're going to give the ability for vendors like Cisco and, Meraki and, Trend Micro and all kinds of different, hardware and solution providers the ability to write their own solutions. So maybe Palo Alto will come out with a firewall analysis solution that you can, just upload your Palo Alto logs and it can provide you with a nice dashboard of all that information. But until we get there, we need to be able to surface this information. So here's a sample of just looking at some criteria. So all I'm going to do is put a star in there. I want to look for everything. And what type of data do I want to look for? I want to look for performance type data. And this is just going to return every perf counter value in my entire environment. So obviously not the greatest because that's far too much data. We can see server name, we see object name, we see counter name, the instance name, this being the C drive, as well as the counter path. And with that information, we can very easily go under. Let's just fire that back up again. You'll notice this metric section. What this metric section allows you to do is very, very quickly drill down into that information or normalize that information. So just by clicking that metric button, it's began to diagram all of the information on my performance counters. Things like average memory available on a particular server. But I want to restrict this a little more. So rather than looking at just performance counter data, I want to restrict it to only look at the object name where it's equal to processor. So again, we're looking for performance counters, and now I only want to look at processor counters. And in this case, this is showing me all of the processor counters on all of the servers in my organization. So there we've immediately surfaced the average processor time on all of my boxes. And you get these really, really nice graphs that you can drill down into. You can begin spotting trends. You know, this is our internal SharePoint server that does a lot of crawls. It does a crawl hourly for content and modified content. So you can begin seeing the trends happening on that particular machine. So now we want to restrict it even further, or say we want to look at, you know, the average value. This is just showing me, you know, a total count. So now what I can do is pass it a measure command with an average of the counter value. And this is going to calculate the average counter value for me in my organization. But in this case, with measure average, we need to group by a certain value. And in this case, I'm going to opt to group by computer. So this is going to show me the average counter value grouped by computer. Now let's do this from a time-based threshold. So rather than just showing me an average counter value, let's throw in an interval, like a 10-minute interval. So this is going to show me the average processor counter value over an interval of 10 minutes. As soon as you toss in an interval there, we can begin seeing drastically all of the information returned from a visual perspective. So this is the average CPU of all of the machines in our organization that are currently being reported. You can very easily spot trends, so you know we can opt to select no counter values, and then opt to drill down into specific counter values. So if we wanted to spot trends in our domain controller, and again, everything is time threshold, so you don't have to look at it from the last day. Maybe we only want to look at it based on the last 6 hours. So very easily we can rerun that query and we capture the last 6 hours of data. These graphs can be just click and drag to really drill down and analyze thresholds. So now you begin to see the power of logging this information. Let's look at how we can produce some dashboards, because I don't want to have to go back and re-reference this search criteria every time I want to look at average CPU in my organization. So some of the advanced things we can do is start writing our own solutions. If we don't have a solution to analyze the particular information, we can leverage the view designer to look at this information. And what we can do very quickly is do something like, producing this is the first page in the view designer actually exposes what we want to show as a home page. So we're just going to pick something like line chart. We're going to call this, our infrastructure information chart. And in terms of what we want to put in here for our query, we're going to put our type equals perf. Object name equals counter, and all this is going to do is expose this information on our basically our tile that's going to be exposed on the home page. So not very relevant, but what we're going to do now is go under the view section, which is where we actually compose our different views. So we have all different types of views in here, things like line charts and donuts and pie charts. In our case, we're going to look at doing a line chart, callout, and list. And in here, we're going to, give the group a title, and in this case, let's call it average CPU. And down here in the header, we're also going to put average CPU. Now for our line chart, here's our query that we're going to do. And in this case, we're going to do a star type equals perf. And we get our object name, measure by computer value. Average counter value by computer. And then we're going to go down here into our callout title. We're just going to call this average CPU. Give it a series name. And now our list query is where we're actually going to list the different objects. So rather than just doing a graph, we're actually going to list fridge count. So now we're producing a list in here, and what you'll see in here is this list actually begins to populate on our graph. So we can track average CPU, we can track our list of the different servers in our environment and the different processors and the different processor utilization. We can actually look at configuring thresholds as well. So we can look at configuring a normal warning and error threshold. So as that processor utilization exceeds a certain amount, within that graph we can actually draw it and show you that the information is red as well as yellow. And what I can do is back out and just show you where I've produced that information. So again, this probably took me an hour to throw together in terms of the dashboard. So I produced this infrastructure information dashboard. And if we look at the different graphs that we have available to us, we begin visualizing all of the performance information that I dug up. Things like average CPU, servers with low memory, servers with low disk space, average bytes sent, average bytes received, disk read and write latency, with thresholds on them all. So if we look at something like average write latency, we can put thresholds in here to keep track of that. So as our particular write latency value exceeds a certain amount, these servers or objects become yellow versus green versus red. So it's very easy to track this information from a visualized perspective. And very easy to go back in here and look at this. So when I need to analyze something's gone wrong in my environment, I can pop up to this dashboard and look at this information. And what's really nice is trends amongst the different pieces of infrastructure in your environment. So maybe you've got some of your servers on a Nutanix, some of them are on EqualLogic SAN, some of them are maybe up in Azure, and you want to visualize the trends between, or the differences between how that infrastructure is performing amongst all those different environments. Well, what we can do quickly is, look at our average disk latency, and rather than optimize or looking at all of the information, let's just look at our DCs running in Azure and our domain controller running on-prem. So you can begin to quickly see the difference. This is an on-premise domain controller on just a single physical piece of hardware, and this is domain controllers running in Azure in terms of latency. So we can visualize the difference between shared infrastructure in Azure and on-prem infrastructure. Now keep in mind the values of these latencies are still well below the threshold required, the best practice threshold provided by Microsoft. So we're not having any issues with our infrastructure here. So very, very easily to spot trends in there as well. Other graphs, things like tracking average bytes sent and received for keeping track of network throughput in your organization. So, are your servers sending data? Are your servers receiving data? And how do you really keep track of that? So we can visualize that information from a network adapter standpoint. So we can quickly see which servers are the, heaviest data usage within our organization. And again, you can highlight this information to drill down into those values. You can specify different thresholds of time to look at it. Maybe you don't want to look at it at a 10-minute interval. Maybe you actually want to look at it within a 10-second interval. Actually, I believe 60 is the lowest because we've only specified our thresholds for 60. Let's put a 60-second interval in here, and we should be able to surface some more detailed information. Again, we are returning a substantial amount of data with a 60-second performance counter interval versus 10 minutes. That's basically 10 times the amount of data that we're returning from this query. So you might want to look at restricting the time threshold so the data returned is a little bit more restrictive rather than looking at an entire day. But there you go. We can see a much more detailed representation of what's happening on this particular box. So you can really, really drill down, from a global perspective with a high threshold, spot some trends in your graphs and information and really drill down into a much more finite threshold. So we use this actually for, like I said, tracking the IOPS performance of particular processes. So you can actually key in, maybe specific processes that run some of your business applications and track what the, IOPS requirements are for them. Now, alerting is built into log analytics as well. Now, how alerting works is basically the solution that you add, security and compliance, update management, anti-malware assessment. Those solutions have alerts built into them. And those alerts can be driven over email or even integration with some of the ticketing systems like ServiceNow. Now, if you want to create your own alert, you can actually do so directly from the alerts pane here. So when you produce some search criteria that you do find valuable, you can actually click the alert button, and it will take that search criteria and turn that search criteria into an alert. Now, if we take a look at a sample alert based on something like high CPU utilization, we can go under those alerts, and I can just show you an example of how that would be done. So under the alerts node, we can see an alert that I did create here for, alert me when the CPU on a particular server is over 90% for a threshold, of 15 minutes. And I can actually look at that alert. And all the alert really is a search criteria, this exact same search criteria. And you can actually see me adapting. I've actually excluded my SharePoint server from my alerts because I know this server does a crawl every 15 minutes and its CPU does spike. So this was an option to just ignore that particular machine. So here's my perf counter, my search criteria, and then here I'm basing this alert on a metric measurement. That's basically saying perform this search criteria every 15 minutes and alert me when the aggregated value, this being the average, is greater than 90%. And alert me when the total number of breaches is simply over 1. And in that case, this is simply going to alert me when I have more than one alert on this particular search criteria. And you can specify email addresses in here as well as webhooks and runbooks. So you can actually have runbooks executed on these servers to actually remediate issues. So how that works is Microsoft's actually begun introducing Azure Automation into some of these solutions. So if we take, for example, something like the update management solution, what that solution does is analyze what particular servers in your environment are missing critical patches, Windows updates. And you'll actually see any of the tiles that are green are actually involved with the automation solution. So both the update management and change tracking solution have the ability to execute runbooks. Now, what the update management one can do is it can actually forcibly install the patches for you. So when you install the update management solution, it can keep track of what servers are missing patches, and it can actually run a runbook on those servers through Azure Automation to deploy patches to that environment. Now, this still requires you to have a WSUS server on-prem. It does not work with servers that are managed by Configuration Manager. A lot of organizations who, maybe they don't do server patching with SECM. Maybe they have standalone WSUS boxes to control patching. Well, they can now use this update management solution to actually schedule and deploy patches to servers that are managed through OMS. You can actually do it very easily. And the way this works is when you deploy this particular solution, any Windows computer connected to your OMS workspace will automatically be configured as a hybrid runbook worker. Now, what this means is Azure Automation is actually tying into that VM and making it a hybrid runbook worker. Now, in terms of the runbooks that are used to actually patch those systems, you have no access to them. You can't see them. You can't look at them. They're totally run and managed by Microsoft. Microsoft has abstracted the entire process. The complexity of configuring your runbook environments and Azure Automation credentials and all kinds of things is completely gone. The way that they've done this is built the runbooks on the back end. When you deploy this solution to your environment, it configures all your agents as hybrid runbook workers so they can run runbooks that Microsoft provides on behalf of your organization. So again, there's no way to look at those runbooks, but it does key in here that if you've already configured a workstation as a hybrid runbook worker. So maybe you're already looking at Azure Automation. Maybe you've already configured one as a hybrid runbook worker. You'll need to remove it from your OMS workspace before adding the solution to the environment to prevent your runbooks from failing. So there's still some caveats there in terms of Azure Automation if you're already running runbooks in your environment through Azure Automation. And I think that is about the extent of my presentation. So what we'll do is open it up for Q&A. Matt, if you're there, do you want to look and see if there's any questions and answers in the chat window? If anybody has any questions, they're more than happy to just take themselves off mute and ask.
Gino, did I answer your question in the IM window?
Yeah, you did. I'm just curious if you could actually show it. I've looked around in OMS. I'm not 100% sure exactly where that would be.
What was the question? Okay, security and audit solution for only my DCs, but perf collection for all other servers. Yeah, in that case, you'd have to do something like I talked about, standing up more than one OMS workspace. There's no constraint to the number of workspaces you can install. They don't charge you per workspace. They only charge you for data ingestion. So nothing is stopping you from going into your Azure environment, going under the log analytics solution, under the OMS workspace environment, and just creating a new OMS workspace. You can actually hit add here and create as many as you want. So maybe you wanted the Active Directory environment just for your Active Directory solution, and the rest for some other environment. Now, the Microsoft monitoring agent is actually multi-homed as well. So you can actually have one agent connected to up to, I think it's 3 OMS workspaces.
Okay, that's cool. But in terms of the SCOM integration, you can only be connected to one OMS workspace from there?
In terms of which integration you mean?
The integration with SCOM itself.
Yes. Yep, correct. Yeah, if you leverage SCOM can only connect directly to one OMS workspace. But what you can do, and I have seen people do, is upgrade the agents on your environments that use SCOM, and then what you can do is under the control panel, under the Microsoft monitoring agent, you can actually click the OMS workspace tab. Let me just see if I can find a snapshot of what that looks like. OMS multi-homed agent. You can actually go under the control panel under the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, and under here what you'll actually see is an Azure Log Analytics tab, and in there you can actually add your workspace ID. So what this means is your agent can be connected to SCOM, doing SCOM things without any issue, and it can also be running a connection directly to a separate OMS workspace, totally separate from SCOM. So in that case, you could easily hop on those servers that you do want to connect directly to an OMS workspace, configure those workspaces IDs in here, and SCOM will continue to operate unbeknownst to Log Analytics at all.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah, I actually have done that for a client when we wanted to POC Log Analytics, but we didn't want to touch their SCOM environment. So, yep, by all means, you just have to make sure you upgrade that agent, but that agent is totally backwards compatible with SCOM.
Awesome. Good to know. Thank you.
Okay, folks, any other questions for Mr. Chris Stelzer, or would you like to transition to hearing about what Microsoft will charge you for licensing this stuff and how to get started? Going once, going twice, thrice. So Microsoft, in their wisdom, has 3 ways that you can obtain these items. Number 1 is a la carte. And I'm sure you're all aware already, Azure is a collection of about 70 different services, and each of them is priced a little differently, some of them per gig, some per minute, some per node. So as Mr. Chris Stelzer has just brought up here, you can see that there is a price for Log Analytics, and it's a price per gigabyte. So what you're showing here, Chris, is the US dollar price. Up above, if you were to flip that tab to Canadian, then our happy audience members can see it in Canadian dollars. So it ends up being about $2.80 per gig for Log Analytics as a standalone artifact.
Now, the one caveat I'll just touch on quickly, Matt, with the price per gig solution, you don't get the permission to run the change tracking and the update management solution. This is one caveat to the price per gig model, is that the price per gig model does not allow automation components, like I talked about with Windows Update. So if you decide to go the price per gig model, you do not get access to the automated solutions, i.e. update management and change tracking. So you won't be able to patch your servers using the automated runbook workers. For that, you will have to move to the third pricing option, which Matt will discuss.
Sure. So the first option is this a la carte, and then Microsoft has created a whole bunch of bundled offerings under the Operations Management and Security OMS. banner, and there's 4 modules to the OMS banner that you can see here. I think you're showing it here. So security and compliance, automation and control, insights and analytics, and then underneath that drop down is the disaster recovery option, or somewhere here is the disaster recovery option. So there's 4 modules, and for these modules you'll pay per node. As an example, I'll just browse back to my setup. As an example, the Insight and Analytics node costs about $16 Canadian. The Automation and Control node cost is about $11 per node. Now, if that's not what you're looking for and you want to use a couple of these options, for example, both the Automation and Control and the Insight and Analytics, Microsoft has created a bundle of modules, which they call the OMS E1 and OMS E2 licensing packages. So the OMS E1 would be $22-ish per, $24 per node. So for that $24, as you see here, you get the Insight and Analytics pieces and the Automation and Control pieces, which has been the subject of today's webinar. You also get access to licensing for your on-prem system center. A few days ago, we did another seminar on the backup and site recovery options as part of the OMS suite, and you would need to purchase E2 for that functionality.
And I think Matt's note about supporting on-prem System Center is really key, because a lot of organizations, maybe they don't have server licensing for System Center. Maybe they're just doing config-man on workstations. Well, if you pick up this per node pricing, you'll actually gain the rights to use Configuration Manager and Operations Manager on your nodes that are licensed. So a lot of people are actually moving away from the, per socket data center licensing or per, server licensing of System Center, and unleashing the System Center licensing through the OMS subscription components.
And then the last note on that is that if you have already licensed System Center for your server infrastructure, Microsoft will give you a discount on your OMS E1 and OMS E2 pricing. So any other questions about pricing before we talk about next steps? Okay. So as I see it, you've got, if your interest was warranted today, and this is in fact worth pursuing a little further, I feel like you've got 3 solid options to proceed. One is to do what you've done, Gino, which is to create a workspace and an experiment. Microsoft has a way, as Chris described, for you to get access to these to the dashboard and the data for free, up to 500 megs, and that's a really good option for kicking the tires. If you're pretty sure that you want to proceed, of course, we are a professional services organization, and we could offer you a professional services engagement, potentially a Microsoft-funded one. So either through deployment planning services or a Microsoft marketing fund called the OMS Accelerate program, we can offer proof of concepts for our customers to get you to a point where you're seeing some real value out of these services, and hopefully without having to pay for it. The third option, and the most interesting one from my vantage, is really to think about professional services as a service. So we all know that operations management engagements, or operations management as a discipline, is very difficult, and it's difficult to really sustain a lot of focus on it and to take on that continuous improvement methodology. Well, we can help with that. So we've started to work with organizations on a monthly basis. We review data, we update dashboards together, we update alerting together, we make sure everything's working well, and then each month we layer on a couple new services, a couple new servers. We update you on changes at Microsoft, and we go away for a month and we come back. In this way, instead of doing a large one-time professional services engagement, we meet monthly, and over time we perfect your environment for using these services. If any of that is of interest, we are going to be sending a recording of this webinar to all of you. We'll be sending information about pricing. We'll also be sending information about those next steps. And with 9 minutes to go, does anyone have any final questions for Chris or myself? Going once, twice, thrice. Oh, wait, Jeff's typing. Nope, thanks, guys. Perfect. And on that happy note, we hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.